You're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is award-winning documentary filmmaker Joshua Zeman. And we're going to be talking about, oh, wow, this amazing documentary entitled Checkpoint Zoo. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Hi, Jan. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Oh, you're welcome. This is such a heart-wrenching documentary. Although there are light moments where I laughed, but certainly lots of moments when I had tears. So I really want to get into this because it's so timely.
Hmm.
It's so timely. I think it's stated in the beginning of your documentary, people have started to forget about the war in Ukraine. And, it's been going on for what, 3.5 years now. And so, how we all are, we go on to the next war and then this war or whatever else is going on. And we tend to forget about something that's taking place in another part of the world that is still going on to this day. So this brings it back home for us to look at it again, but more importantly, the brave people that are a part of this movie. I mean, just amazing. So our audience knows, Josh, why don't you give a synopsis of what Checkpoint Zoo is all about?
Sure. The film is about, first of all, it takes place in the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Um, it's really interesting because there was a zoo in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, and it's only 30 miles from the Russian border. And what's interesting is that when the Russians kind of came over, they went to attack this city, Kharkiv, and they set up their kind of military operations on the edge of this zoo. And the zoo is called Feldman Ecopark. And the Ukrainians, in trying to defend their city, they came out and they set up their, basically armament on the other side of this zoo. And so what happened was these two sides start basically shooting all these bombs and missiles at each other. And in the middle is this zoo of 5,000 animals. And when the war started in those very first days, they were shooting missiles. And so all the people who worked in the zoo kind of ran away. They were just literally, I think, in shock and trying to, save their lives and save their family. And what the story ends up becoming is it's a rescue mission of a bunch of zookeepers and volunteers who stayed behind, and they would go on to spend the next couple months trying to rescue all these animals. First, it's trying to just save the animals, make sure they have food, make sure they have water. But as the war increases, they try to evacuate the animals, and it becomes, in some respects, a mission impossible. They had to take out 5,000 animals. They had little resources. There were 5 people, 10 people doing it. And so we had the honor to be, of going over there and watching them and filming them as they did a lot of their evacuations.
It's truly an amazing story in the sense that there were so few people who were there to actually facilitate making this happen. But with three brothers,
Mhm. Two,
uh,
yeah, two of them were brothers. Two of the young volunteers were brothers.
and so three, but they were the other one was a friend of theirs,
Yeah,
and
the other one was a friend. Yeah.
they had been trying to volunteer over a period of time at the
Yeah.
zoo, and they wouldn't let for whatever reason they didn't let them volunteer. So go through that. Talk about
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So basically, well, it's actually starts very tragic. Originally, there were, the zoo had hundreds of employees, but and it's hard to fault people
Right.
for, suddenly their lives are upended in a war and they're concerned about their families, and so they just that first night, when the attack happened, they went home, they grabbed their families, and many of them, um, evacuated to other parts of Ukraine where it was safe. There were very few people left to take care of this zoo. There were like maybe 6 or 7 zookeepers. And within like a couple of weeks, 4 of those zookeepers are killed by Russian forces. Then there's like 3 people to kind of basically feed 5,000 animals water. You're running around a zoo trying to give these animals food and water. And then these 4 boys show up. They're like teenagers. They're, a little older. and they say, well, we want to help. And the head zookeeper is like, oh, I don't know. You guys are young and, you're kids. Well, it turns out that these kids end up being braver than anyone. And they would run in there and they would evacuate these lions and tigers and bears, while bombs are exploding. And so it's kind of the story is a little bit through their eyes, is kind of young and impressionable, but also I think um, realizing what they're doing, seeing these animals in distress and how that affects who they are, and also the changing understanding of what it's like for animals in captivity. I think it's becoming a little wide-eyed, and I think it's interesting to watch their perspective.
Yeah, well, they are sort of the heart and soul, I mean, of the film in many ways, because it is the perspective through their eyes. But yeah, there's so much to go into.
And
Go
there's
ahead.
well, the funny thing is like in a lot of ways we structured it as like one of those Tarantino-esque 1970s, where eagles dare type of impossible World War II missions, and that was kind of how we thought of it a little bit because that's how it felt. And and it's just funny that when you're doing a kind of rescue mission, there are all those archetypal characters that come up. There's the one woman, Svetlana, who's been there for 30 years, and she loves the animals far more than people, and she curses like a sailor. And so, there's her, and then there's the big boss, Feldman, this kind of Russian oligarch, if you sorry, not Russian, Ukrainian oligarch, if you will, who wanted to do good for his community in Kharkiv and spent all this money to bring these animals there, but then he ends up losing all of his money to take care of these animals. Um, there's this huge guy, Andre, he's like the muscle, but of course he's the one who has this unbelievable connection with these animals and is almost like, like a child in some respects in his innocence. And then there's the battalion leader, Vitaly, and he's like, he's again yelling and screaming. And then there's Vadim, who's one of our narrators, who's almost like the intellectual. So it's just so interesting how when you go to film these stories, these archetypal characters come up.
It is fascinating. And I was thinking about it, all these people were from diverse backgrounds and occupations and came together for the greater cause of saving these animals, which is pretty daunting to begin with because there were over 5,000 animals that needed to be saved. But how they managed to work together as a team to make it happen. You really didn't see too many people, sometimes there's too many chiefs and not enough
Hmm.
Indians and, or opposite sometimes too, usually
Yeah,
more
right.
chiefs. But that didn't seem to appear to be a problem.
You know, the head zookeeper, Vitali, he's a real, kind of general, if you will. And then you have these just boys who are willing, kind of thrill seekers who are willing to do anything. And you had Svetlana, who was the mom, if you will. And, they're like, it's okay, mom, we'll be all right, but she was always making sure that everybody was okay. Yeah, it was very interesting. The one thing is that if you watch the film, the first early weeks there's not a lot of footage, right? And that's because I think it was the older folks were almost taking care of, were just going around doing what they were doing. But then you get these younger generation of volunteer kids in there, and suddenly they're like filming everything, with their phones. And so the only problems I ever heard about was uh Vitali would yell at them. They're like, "Stop taking pictures. We got to get these animals out. You're going to get killed." And they would be like, "Okay, but one more selfie with this lion." Now, thank God that they took all this video because, it helps tell our story, but you could definitely see the difference in the two generations in terms of one of documenting, the other one not documenting. And really, thank God that they did document. For example, Timothy, who's like the leader of the young boys, he would drive this van. They were always driving vans because they couldn't take big vehicles in because anytime they took a large vehicle in, the Russian drones would spot them, and within 2 to 3 minutes, bombs would start going off. So they had to take in like sprinter vans. And every time they went in a sprinter van, they would go grab all the kangaroos and they'd put the kangaroos in a sprinter van. And then they'd take video of themselves driving, with a sprinter van full of kangaroos. And it ends up being incredibly cute to watch them do this. But they made these videos of what they were doing. And that ended up going viral. One was on the Colbert Show. And so thank God they did document what was going on.
And that helped a lot, bringing, because the world came in, to help them.
Hmm.
I mean, here they were, uh, sort of struggling. And you're right, Feldman, what's his first name?
Alexander.
Alexander Feldman, who started the zoo, he walks us through his wine cellar, and he had wine that Nicholas II, the Tsar or whatever, drank. I mean, how much has that got to be worth? And how he had to sell all of his wine in order to keep funding feeding and taking care of these animals, and then opening his house, which was a huge house, by the way.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But bringing in all those animals, just doing, thank God he has a wonderful wife that, allowed him to do all of that,
W-
because there wasn't one room in that
It,
house that didn't have an animal. And you open a door and there's, whatever, an ostrich in the bathroom or something, it's quite wild, but shows the love of these animals.
he Feldman is an interesting character. He when there was the transition from communism to capitalism, he happened to be there, and I think he ended up making a lot of money because he, owned a mechanic shop for cars, and so he just started making money, and then he started making more and more money, and he ended up becoming one of the richest men in Kharkiv, and with that, he was able to buy all these antique cars, and he had weapons collections, and he had art. But it's that irony. I for me, he's a little bit like Schindler,
Mm.
Schindler's List. This guy
Yeah.
who makes all this money, and you question how he made his money. But the idea of this incredibly rich man who spends all his time collecting things, and then once this war happens, has to turn around and sell it all for chicken feed. Literally. It's
Yeah.
literally he's selling it for chicken feed, for
Mm.
carrots and celery. And I kept asking him, I was like, what's it like, to have all these things and then have to give them away for nothing, And he's like this, he was very kind of nonchalant. He's like, this is what we do, what are we gonna do? We have to take care of them. But it was interesting because he did have $1 million wine collection, and he said that he had to sell it for maybe $200,000. And I said, "Well, who did you sell it to?" And he said, "I don't know exactly, but I think I sold it to a Russian oligarch for
Mm.
nothing."
Yeah.
So it's the irony of money and things like that, yet comparatively to animals. They don't care about money. They don't care about borders. They don't care who's right or who's wrong. They just it's unconditional love, theoretically. And so those are some really interesting ideas with which to explore. And yes, there's one point in the film where they realize they have no place to put these animals. It's one thing to try and evacuate 5,000 animals from a zoo. The question is, where do you put them? There were numerous people in the community who was like, "Oh, I'll take the animals." And it's like, "No, you can't take an ostrich in your kitchen or in your barn. That won't work. They need to be fed properly. They need to be housed with the right animal, with the other right animals." And so Feldman said, "Bring them to me." And he has a big property with a soccer court and everything. And so it's a big joke because I don't think he actually knew what he was getting himself into. And then they put all like the barn animals on the soccer field, and they put, the turtles in the sauna. What's interesting is turtles in a sauna smell incredibly bad. So whenever I spoke to anybody, they were like, "Oh my God, the smell in the house. You have no idea." And his wife was away. So she didn't know. And he's like, "Listen, you could do anything you want. Like I love these animals more than anything in my life, as long as my wife doesn't find out." But of course, when she got back, she's like, "What happened to the house?" It's like a teenage party, but worse.
But you didn't film that. A reaction to it.
No.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, then what happens is he has no more places to put these animals, and he's got the big predator animals that
Mhm.
are, um, they're hard to get housed. And he was worried, very worried, they all were worried, that with the war going on and scaring these animals, that some of these predator type animals, lions and tigers, and would break loose and possibly kill people in the area. So tell us what happened.
Well, Obviously, you could think in an evacuation that you're, especially in war, right? This is an evacuation in wartime. And so when you're going in, you've got very limited resources. That means limited resources of not only where you're going to put them, but how you're going to get them out. They can only go in sprinter vans because after 2 minutes, they would be bombed. There's very little anything. So at first they were like, well, we hope we don't have to move them. They actually thought the war would be over in like 3 weeks. But as the war goes on, they're like, oh my God, this is continuing on. I don't think this is sustainable. And so little by little, they started to take out the more docile animals. The the first thing they took out was the monkeys, and you can't just keep these animals in there because, and this is a little bit tragic, but when you have an animal that's in a cage and it can't run when there's a bomb going off, it can't engage its primal sense, which is to flee. But there are bombs going off, and there are bombs going off all the time, very close. Basically, the animals get so excited and terrified that they end up having heart attacks. So they realize very quickly, well, this is unsustainable. Too many the animals are dying. We have to get them out. So they started to take out the small ones, the docile animals first, the kangaroos and the turtles and the little monkeys. But they were very nervous about taking out the predators because these are lions, these are tigers, these are bears, these are hyenas, and because again, they didn't have a place to put them. And transporting predators is very difficult. You have to anesthetize them. The problem with that is that they didn't have any anesthesia. They didn't have cages for them. They What kept happening was bombs kept getting closer and closer to the zoo and to the eventually they were like one day a bomb is going to go off and it's going to break open the lion cage and these lions which are starved, half starved and terrified, they're going to go out into the community and they're going to eat somebody,
Right.
literally.
Right.
We're very afraid of that, so they kept holding off and finally there was a barrage of bombs that hit the lion cage, and like by the grace of God the lions didn't get out, and they're like, okay, we have to take them out. Let's go on social media, let's ask for help. And so thankfully much of the world responds, Ukraine responds, and suddenly these trucks started arriving with cages and food and anesthesia, and then they would go in and they would dart these animals and try and bring them out. But you can imagine, first of all, they didn't have a lot of anesthesia. So they would use like the most little possible to conserve it. So they would go in, the lion would be asleep, but it was almost like drunk. So they would walk into the cage and the lion would open up its eyes. It couldn't move, but it would open up its eyes and they'd all run out, and then they'd go back in. And they were terrified and they would all joke with each other, like, it's going to eat you, watch out. And so, but, you had to be careful that managing the doses of anesthesia is really difficult. What an animal is normally, how much it takes to put that animal to sleep. But you're talking about animals that are coursing with adrenaline. You're talking about animals that are haven't eaten well. So it's really hard to get that mixture correctly. Thank God they didn't end up killing any animals, which was a miracle in itself. But you're sitting there taking an animal out, and the one thing that will wake an animal out of its coma or anesthesia coma is a loud explosion. But that was happening because they would go there and the Russians would start to target them. So literally they're going to grab these animals and all of a sudden there's explosions are happening. The lions are, so it was incredibly dangerous. And yet they did it. I, I had a screening in Miami and I had spoken to a number of people, zookeepers. But when this guy watched it in Miami, he's like, "Oh, I'm the head zookeeper for the Miami." He's like, "You don't understand what these kids did. Like, it is incredible what they were able to do, and the fact that they didn't over anesthetize any animals, and the fact that they didn't get killed. Like, it's terrifying. Like, we do it in unbelievably controlled situations, and these kids." Are just like trying to do it to save everybody's lives. And he's like, you have no idea. If I showed this to veterinary groups all across the United States, they would freak out what these kids were able to do.
It's amazing. It really is amazing. And you keep the pace going throughout the film. It unfolds like and it just you're sitting at the edge of your seat, going, okay, are they going to be able to do this? How are they going to do it? I love the line though, and I am gonna ruin this. I'm just gonna
Sure.
say it though. Saving Private Lion.
Well,
Just I wrote that down. I was like, I love that.
It
And
is
Mission
funny.
Impossible too.
Yeah. I mean, that's how they kept, first of all, the Ukrainians by nature are very snarky. But they're very, like, with a little bit of a death wish, meaning not death wish, but like they joke about death, and I think that's what happens when, your country is always under this, oppression as happening. But as a cultural group, they also have that. They're very tough, and I think that allows them to kind of joke in this kind of manner. So it was, they would always go in and they would joke around. The boys would joke around with each other and be like, "Oh, I heard today you're gonna die." Like they would tell that to their friends,
Oh
and
my God.
yeah, and everybody's like, "Oh, stop." But I was like, "Guys, that's kind of not funny." But they're like, "No, it's hysterical." So, there was all these just great one-liners. They're very comedic people, and so it was just fun to watch them do what they do, and it was amazing. It was amazing to watch them do. But again, it is exciting and it is terrifying. And when you have animals, it just adds that extra layer of saving something so innocent. You know?
And the love that you see
Oh yeah,
with these animals, and how they could feel, the humans were feeling the emotions of the animals that they were saving. And afterwards, how, it's true, when you save an animal, you are connected for the rest of your life. I've saved a couple of cats in my life, and boy, there's a bond there that is unbreakable. And I can only
absolutely.
imagine when you're doing it with all of these animals, there was that same bond.
I mean, when you take in a rescue animal, that there is an additional level of both responsibility, comfort, love, all these things. And that's this unique relationship that we have with animals that we don't always talk about, but we feel. And that was present here. There were times when they would go into cages and they were like, "Okay, guys, this is a predator. This animal could kill you." And they would open up the door and the animal would just walk out and walk right into the van, and they were blown away because somehow they could look in each other's eyes and everybody knew. And that's incredible you
Hmm.
know
Hmm.
so that was interesting. Svetlana, the woman who I mentioned before, who curses like the Russian, sailor, she also cries at the minute. The minute there's something going on, she cries, and the oligarch too, he just cries like incredibly. And there was this feeling. There were so many emotions going on underneath the surface. There was so much interconnection between humans and animals. That's what makes this story so interesting. And the fact that you don't have to say it, but you see it. You see the look in the animal's eyes. Look, the other thing I like to tell people is, you've seen your animal, that which you love, at sometimes at its best and its worst. And like when it's thunder, animals get frightened. And these people were seeing those animals daily, in animals that were terrified. And I think that affected them in a way that is really hard to understand. That's why the film, while not dwelling on are zoos important and what role does zoos play in society, but it, you have to ask yourself, what's going on here. But then in Europe, zoos do have a real interesting place. There's something I learned that I took from me in Eastern Europe. All the zoos are in the middle of the city.
Mm.
Why? The zoos are in the middle of the city because it's the Garden of Eden. It is the innocence of the whole city is found in the animals, and the animals are in the center.
Oh,
And so they
wow.
don't want to evacuate the animals in wartime because you're ripping the heart out of the city and of its people. And
Mm.
so that was also so interesting to me, the role that animals had in human innocence.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. Well, it's a beautiful film. I wish you much success with it. Where can people see Checkpoint Zoo?
Oh, that's a great question. Now, if I only knew. No, I mean, I know a little bit, but well, we're going to be at the Quad in New York City on August 15th. That I know for sure. We are going to be playing Coral Gables. Hold on, let me pull up my calendar. I try and leave the distribution to some of our wonderful
That's all
distribution
right.
partners.
And we can certainly contact them and we'll put it into our social media
Oh, that'd be
postings.
great.
Yeah,
That'd be
we'll
great.
definitely put it there.
And by the way, interesting, you know, as you might assume, right? Octopus Teacher, March of the Penguins, films with animals always do really well. And so we thought we would get distribution. But unfortunately, films with animals that are about Ukraine don't always get distribution. There
Interesting.
was a little bit of a fear about some kind of retribution from the administration, I think. So, unfortunately now, but fortunately, because I actually like this process a lot better on the indie cinema side, is we're going out and we're doing a little bit of our own self distribution. So that's interesting and exciting. So it is important to go out and support, and I hope people do so. By the way, you're not going to see animals get killed. What you are going to see is one of the greatest animal rescue stories of all
Yes.
time. And
Yeah.
I guarantee you, you will walk out of this theater feeling super connected, both to Ukrainian people, but to animals, and really appreciating what empathy, compassion, and selflessness looks like. So
Exactly.
with that note, we will be playing in New York City at the Quad Cinema starting on the 15th. We'll be in LA the following week at Lemley, and we're going to be in Coral Gables at the following week as well.
Great. Great. Well, Josh, I wish you much success again with Checkpoint Zoo. Everyone, check it, seek it out. And if you can't find it, maybe do a campaign to get it into a theater near you. So,
Oh, yeah. People, if they go to our website, which is checkpointzoo.com, you will be able to have screenings locally. All you have to do is sign up. We're working with Gather, which is a great group. And so if you're part of an organization, for example, veterinarian group, if you're part of animal rescue groups, you can go through that way as well. We want everybody to see this film.
yeah, and you should. Whether you love, if you have a deep love for animals, you definitely want to
Oh,
see it.
absolutely.
No
Yeah, yeah,
question
yeah.
about it, but you'll just come away and you're right with a wholly different viewpoint. But it's a really well done film. As I said, it's got humor, it's got sadness, it's got a lot of things in it. So that's why you go to the movies to get moved. I always say that. So
Well,
and touched.
there was a very famous distributor who always said, "If I cry, I buy."
Uh-huh.
And so, it's not always tears of sadness. I find myself crying, but it's not. I'm not sad.
Right.
It's just like it's about watching people be selfless.
Right.
That I think in today's world that's really a moving thing.
We need more of that, and this film certainly highlights that. So thank you so much, Josh. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show today. And again,
Pleasure
much
is all
success
mine.
with Checkpoint Zoo.
Thank
Everyone,
you.
seek it out.
Bye.
You're welcome, Josh. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.